Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz taking some heat from his own party. Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger calling on Gaetz to resign over the sex trafficking allegations against him, allegations that Gaetz continues to deny. Now the House Ethics Committee is investigating. The prosecution in the Derek Chauvin murder trial wrapping up its 10th day of testimony. A forensic pathologist explaining why George Floyd's death does not resemble an overdose.
What I observed from all of these videos is this was not a sudden death. Likewise, it was not the type of death that has been reported in fentanyl overdose, for example, where someone becomes very sleepy and then just sort of gradually, calmly, peacefully stops breathing. This was not that.
And mourners around the world paying tribute to Prince Philip, who died peacefully this morning at the age of 99. Here's President Biden.
Jill and I and the entire administration send our condolences to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the loss of Prince Philip. 99 years old, he never slowed down at all, and which I admire the devil out of.
Let's bring in NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobiea. She's outside Buckingham Palace. And NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez. He's in Windsor. Kelly, we'll start with you. Buckingham Palace is asking people not to gather in crowds to mourn Prince Philip, as we saw earlier. How are people expressing their condolences there in light of the pandemic?
Well, Allison, even tonight, people are still coming here to Buckingham Palace to leave flowers and messages for Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. The two were married for more than 73 years. He was the love of her life. They met the very first time when she was just 13 and, of course, courted long distance during the war years in World War II. So people are coming here to pay their respects and just to pay homage to a man who, you know, dedicated his life to service for more than 60 years. He retired when he was 96 years old and was at the Queen's side for more than 7 decades. One person saying, I'm not sure that the Queen could have done what she did the way she did it all of these years were it not for Prince Philip being at her side. However, the palace and the government both asking people not to gather at sites like this and at Windsor. The reason this is a country still under lockdown restrictions. There are crowd size restrictions. Even earlier today, a notice was posted on the gates of Buckingham Palace as per protocol announcing Prince Philip's death. But it only stayed up for a short time because the palace didn't want people to gather here. Instead, they're asking people to either donate to charity or to sign a condolence book online on the royal website. Allison?
Kelly, how about the pandemic? How is this affecting his funeral arrangements? I know we're learning some of those details now.
Yes. So he was never going to have a state funeral. That was by his own request, and we understand that request will be honored. However, things are changing as we speak. The palace put out a statement earlier today saying that modified funeral and ceremonial arrangements for His Royal Highness are being considered by Her Majesty the Queen, and also adding again that asking that people not gather at royal palaces to pay condolences. So what does that mean? Likely no big funeral processions here in London. That would obviously draw huge crowds. That's something that both the government and the palace want to avoid. But we don't know much more than that in terms of timing or place. No official announcement's been made. We do understand, though, we believe that Prince Philip's funeral service will be held at Windsor Castle at St. George's Chapel. But this is going to have to be a very small service. According to government laws right now, because of the pandemic, only up to 30 people are allowed at funerals. And as I'm sure you know, Allison, the royal family is a large one. The immediate family alone, Prince Philip had 4 children, 8 grandchildren. So it's going to be a very different royal funeral.
Raf, Prince Philip was released from the hospital just a few weeks ago. Could you tell our viewers more about what he was being treated for and whether we know if that played any role in his death?
Yeah, Alison, all the royal family is saying right now is that Prince Philip passed away peacefully here at Windsor Castle this morning. They are not yet giving a specific cause of death. That's not a surprise. We wouldn't necessarily expect to hear that at this stage. But as you said, he did spend a month in hospital from February into March being treated for what Buckingham Palace called a pre-existing heart condition. He underwent surgery as part of that treatment, and then he returned here to Windsor Castle for the final couple of weeks of his life. So we don't know at this point if there is a direct link between that treatment and his death. We do know the prince was in pretty robust health all the way into his 90s. He continued royal engagements until just a couple of years ago. He actually attended the wedding of one of his granddaughters here at Windsor Castle last year. I will say there is nothing to indicate a link between his death and COVID-19. Both Prince Philip and the Queen were vaccinated in January, and there's nothing to suggest that the virus was the cause of his death. Alison.
Prince Philip made more than 22,000 solo public appearances. It's just incredible before retiring from his royal duties back in 2017. Could you just tell us a bit more about his life, this life in particular of service to his country?
Yeah, this was a man who was in service to Britain his entire life. He joins the Royal Navy in 1939 at the outbreak of the Second World War. He saw combat all over the Mediterranean. He was a decorated naval officer, and he actually continued his military career after marrying then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. He kept going as a military officer for several years, but he stepped back when she ascended to the throne as Queen in 1952. And that was the beginning for him also of a new chapter of service. He was at the Queen's side for decade after decade. He traveled the world with her. He hosted heads of state with her. He made appearances on her behalf whenever she asked him to. And of course, he was the father of her 4 children, including Prince Charles, the future King of England. And, you know, he was the patron of innumerable charities here in Britain and around the world. He took a special interest in conservation and wildlife. He was very involved with the British military all the way up into his 90s, involved with different regiments, different units. So really, this was a man who was in service to his country from the time he was a teenager all the way into his 90s. Alison?
Raf, Kelly, thank you both so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
I think the whole nation will obviously be very sad to lose such an amazing man, and I just hope that, you know, he can have a proper funeral to commemorate his life.
Just kind of sad, and, you know, it's kind of nice to pay respects to a really big personality, great man.
The Queen has been married to this gentleman for 70 years. Over that time, that's about, 4 times longer than I've been alive, and, he's been there by her side every single day of her time as Queen, and the fact that now she's going to have to live without that for the rest of her life is unbelievably difficult. So I definitely wanted, to come down here and, lay some flowers to let her know that she is being...
The UK mourning the death of Prince Philip today. He was a fixture of British life, married to the longest-serving monarch in history. Let's go to Chloe Pantazzi, lifestyle deputy editor for Insider. Chloe, Prince Philip was known as the Queen's closest confidant, by her side for 73 years. From what we know, they deeply adored each other. Can you tell us more about their marriage and this incredible loss for the Queen? I just keep picturing her waking up this weekend and reaching for him and doing that every day because you become so accustomed to having someone by your side after 7 decades.
Yeah, this is, of course, an immeasurable loss for the Queen. It's impossible to know how the Queen is feeling right now. I'm sure she's heartbroken and devastated as anyone would be to lose their husband. And yes, this is going to make a big impact and a lasting impact on the royal family as it stands.
Prince Philip really helped transform the royal family, making it more accessible to both the public and the press. How did he modernize the royal family? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, actually. We could credit Prince Philip with televised royal appearances and events. The reason that royal weddings are on television, and the reason that we've seen these big landmark events. In 1953, when the Queen was gearing up for the coronation, a commission that Prince Philip chaired had proposed televising parts of the coronation. And this was an abhorrent thought to the Queen, to Winston Churchill at the time. But this is actually something that Prince Philip was really gunning for, and ended up happening. And it had a huge reaction. 20 million people tuned in to watch that. And it changed the way that the monarchy presented itself to the world, and the relationship and access that the public had to the monarchy. Of course, the royals continue to be a very private organization. There's still so much that we don't know about the royal family, as we found out last month with Meghan and Harry's interview. So it's really interesting the impact that Prince Philip had. I'd also
Philip and Queen Elizabeth met with, yes.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'd also say that as a person, his personality was very unique. Alongside the Queen, he would often quite witty remarks, and he was not without his controversy. So he was a figure that, alongside the Queen, when there was all of this pomp and circumstance going on, would be offering that comic relief, and sometimes quite inappropriate commentary as well. So there was that personality. Just a quick example and a fun one is that when he stepped down and he retired at the age of 95 from his public duties as a royal, somebody had said to him, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that you're standing down." And he said, "Well, these days I can barely stand up." And I think that kind of sums it up.
Absolutely. And no doubt, I'm sure the Queen will look for and miss that comic relief in the days ahead. I understand that he and Queen Elizabeth met with 12 U.S. presidents over the course of their marriage. We're talking everyone from Truman to Trump. Can we talk a bit more about how he'll be remembered around the world?
Yeah, I think he is going to have a lasting legacy. He was never going to take the throne. He's always been alongside the Queen, and as such an iconic monarch, the Queen and Prince Philip kind of came as a package. You would pretty much always see the Queen with Prince Philip on her arm or by her side. And also it was considered kind of not scandalous, but, the PDA that they would exhibit by holding hands. That was back in the day. That was quite an interesting thing for the public to see. So in that way, he also modernized the monarchy. I'd also say that, he was also communities, also more those royal titles when he joined the royal family and married Elizabeth. And they are actually distantly related, which many people don't know. They were distant cousins. So it just shows how tight-knit these families of the upper echelons are.
Chloe, you bring up so many things that we go, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Thank you so much for sharing so many stories of Prince Philip. We appreciate it. Time to check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the Friday edition of the headlines for us from NBCnews.com. Simone, take it away.
Hey, Allison. Unfortunately, we are starting off this Friday edition with some very sad news that people all over the world have been mourning. Three-time Grammy-nominated rapper DMX has died at the age of 50, according to a statement released by his family today. The New York native, whose real name was Earl Simmons, had been on life supports and suffering a heart attack on April 2nd. Performer's family was at his side when he died and says they will release information on memorial services once details are finalized. Outpourings of love and support have already started circulating around social media for the rapper and his loved ones. Well, CDC data showing 1 in 5 Americans are fully vaccinated, and a third of the country has received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. The latest numbers also show the U.S. is administering a 7-day average of 3 million vaccine doses per day. And a new report from Facebook and the Small Business Roundtable saying small business closures across the U.S. are inching back toward their pandemic peaks. The report finding that 22% of U.S. small businesses were closed in February. That's just shy of the peak last May when small business closures were at 23%. States like New York, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts are being hit especially hard with at least 30% of small and medium businesses closed. And California freeing up $536 million for wildfire prevention. The state faces more drought and elevated fire risks that experts warn could be as dangerous as last year's catastrophic fire season. The money will be spent in several different areas, including forest maintenance, defensible space, and vegetation management. And Disneyland announcing its new Avengers campus will open on June 4th. The area is an expansion of Disney's California Adventure theme park in Anaheim. The park will feature a new Spider-Man attraction, a dining space, and an area based on Doctor Strange. It was scheduled to open last July, but you know, I don't even have to say it, coronavirus. I know so many families are itching to get back out to theme parks and pay for overpriced junk food, right, Allison?
People can't wait to pay for those expensive tickets as long as the coronavirus gets out of the way and stops messing with everybody's lives. Thank you, Simone.
Exactly.
The key prosecution witness in Derek Chauvin's murder trial today, Dr. Andrew Baker, the medical examiner who explained his autopsy report on George Floyd.
Mr. Floyd also had what we call hypertensive heart disease, meaning his heart weighed more than it should. So he has a heart that already needs more oxygen than a normal heart by virtue of its size. In my opinion, the law enforcement subdual, restraint, and the neck compression was just more than Mr. Floyd could take by virtue of those heart conditions.
NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald is covering the trial in Minneapolis. Megan, it feels like the week has been building up to Dr. Baker's testimony. What else did he say today?
Yeah, Allison, Dr. Baker explicitly said that it was the subdual and the neck restraint that led to George Floyd's death. So now he is one of several witnesses that jurors have heard from that testified that it was the law enforcement's action, specifically Derek Chauvin's, that ultimately killed George Floyd, Allison.
Megan, the first witness today, forensic pathologist Dr. Lindsay Thomas. Prosecutors asked her about the stress on George Floyd during his arrest. What did she say about that?
So what she did was she used an example that many jurors may be able to relate to, saying that when you suddenly realize that you've lost your child, you don't know where your child is. So for parents, that feeling that you have of fear, she said that it's that same emotion, that same feeling that George Floyd sustained over the course of 9 minutes. And then she went on to kind of explain what that stress on the body does. Take a listen to how she explained it.
Mr. Floyd was already in a position where he was experiencing difficulty breathing and getting enough oxygen in his body. And on top of that now, there's this physiologic stress that's putting increased demand on his heart, increased demand on his lungs, increased demand on his muscles. It's kind of a double whammy to his heart and lungs and muscles and his whole system.
All right, so we're hearing Dr. Thomas there basically saying that that situation, that fear of what was happening with George Floyd just contributed to an already difficult situation where he was struggling to breathe, Allison.
Megan, I understand a representative from Derek Chauvin's family was in court today, and that person was there, a family member for the first time, or a representative. Could you tell us about that?
Right. So this is what's interesting, because we've never seen anyone, or the pool reporters inside the courtroom have reported that we've never seen anyone sitting in the chair for Derek Chauvin's family or friend. In fact, just this week, the chair was taken away, and they said, well, put it back there if somebody shows up. And so what the pool reporters are reporting is that there was a woman of Asian descent that was sitting in that seat. And again, it's the first time that Derek Chauvin has had anyone in his family or a friend or anyone in support of him in the courtroom, Allison.
All right, Megan Fitzgerald in Minneapolis, thank you so much for all of your coverage this week. The House Ethics Committee now investigating Congressman Matt Gaetz over sexual misconduct allegations, and fellow Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger is calling on Gaetz to resign. The Department of Justice investigating Gaetz' trips to the Bahamas with women, particularly whether those women were paid to travel for sex. Now, Gaetz has denied all allegations, and he says he has never paid for sex. So will any other Republicans join in calling for Gaetz' resignation? NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor has the latest from Capitol Hill.
Hey, Allison. Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida faces new calls for resignation among Republicans as he is in the midst of an investigation involving child sex trafficking. The latest call comes from Congressman Adam Kinzinger, an Illinois Republican, who says Matt Gaetz should resign. Other Republicans have not yet come out in favor of that position, and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has said the allegations against Gaetz are serious and that he intends to sit down and talk to him. Now, the big question is whether Kinzinger is a canary in the coal mine or whether he is kind of an odd man out here. Important to know, Kinzinger was the first Republican to also call for the impeachment of former President Trump several months ago, and that ended up being a minority position among House Republicans. Just 10 of them ultimately voted in favor of impeaching the president. At the same time, Gaetz seems to continue to hold his standing as a close ally of the former president, who remains influential in the party. Just 2 days ago, Donald Trump put out a statement saying that Gaetz totally denies the allegations facing him, which is part of a pattern for the former president in taking the word and the denials of allies of his who are facing serious charges or criticisms. Gaetz is also expected to headline a dinner for a pro-Trump group on Friday, which indicates his continued influence and his continued support from the Trump wing of the party. Allison?
An army of Republican poll watchers and an election integrity brigade. That's what a Texas man identifying himself as a GOP official in Harris County is calling for. Take a listen.
I'm trying to get, encourage and recruit as a precinct chair about 30 people in my precinct that will have the confidence and courage to come down and hear in these areas where we really need poll workers, because this is where the fraud is occurring.
A government accountability group called Common Cause Texas published that video on Thursday, and it's raising concerns about potential voter intimidation of minority communities in Houston. Stephanie Gomez is the associate director for Common Cause Texas. Stephanie, thanks for being with us. We just heard that GOP official talking about widespread voter fraud in Texas, of which we have zero evidence. Then he singles out mostly black and Hispanic precincts in Houston and asks for volunteers with courage to be poll watchers. Can you walk us through that and how you believe this is potentially voter intimidation and suppression?
Yeah, of course. That is a definitely concerning video that Common Cause Texas released. Just watching it is entirely unsettling, and it comes at a time where Texas lawmakers are rushing to pass anti-voting legislation like SB 7 and House Bill 6 that would expand the power that poll watchers have while people are voting, with the intent of making it harder to vote. And this is not a new issue. Like, we have had examples, 2010 Harris County, where these groups were coming out and sending poll watchers to black and brown communities in Houston, getting way too close to voters when they were trying to fill out their ballots. So to see that even before this legislation that would just extend their powers is coming out, they're already, riling people up like this is definitely concerning.
We reached out to the Harris County Republican Party, and we haven't heard back yet. But in a statement to the Washington Post, Party Chair Cindy Siegel said, your organization mischaracterized a grassroots election worker recruitment video, and that the goal here is to activate an army of volunteers for every precinct in Harris County and to engage voters for the whole ballot, top to bottom, and ensure every legal vote is counted. What is your response to Siegel there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the video speaks for itself, right? Like, we have had no Republican legislator come out speak against the video. Like, it is, we didn't make up what is being said. Like, the person in the video is very clearly pointing to the white parts of Houston and then circling the black and brown historic communities of the city of Houston, where I'm from, and calling for people to go there, presuming that there's already fraud, something that is widely debunked, and continuing this narrative tactic that led to the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. So.
Stephanie, we are seeing concerns about voting laws and changing to voting laws across the country. We know Georgia just changed its laws. Texas is trying to do the same. How does your organization work with state and local officials? How do you try to counter that and to provide equal access to voting, especially for disenfranchised communities in our country?
Yeah, of course. Like Common Cause Texas is one of those organizations that no matter what year, what's going on, we are out there fighting to make sure that every eligible Texan is able to cast a ballot and that the people in our society are able to participate in our democracy. I mean, we have been at the Texas Capitol ever since the hearing started to fight against these really bad bills, to fight against these people using or prioritizing partisan interests over the well-being of Texans. Like, you know, Texas has been in the headlines for having, a winter storm. You know, I've lived in Texas my entire life. That has never happened. And that, you know, the attention is being put on limiting people's ability to vote. But, you know, Common Cause Texas, if it's our election protection program to make sure that, you know, every eligible Texan can cast a ballot, or if it's fighting for state or local reforms to make sure that we can increase access to create a more equitable democracy, like we are going to be there no matter what.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing, and thanks so much for coming on our show today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
More people are coping with mental health problems these days, including, sadly, some very young kids. The number of kids showing up at ERs after considering suicide or harming themselves more than doubling since 2016, and the pandemic is only making things worse. NBC News senior national correspondent Kate Snow has one mother's heartbreaking story.
Allison, unfortunately, the number of kids between 6 and 12 showing up at ERs, at hospitals, at children's hospitals has risen. I spoke with one mom in Wisconsin who really wanted to tell her painful story to try to help other families.
There's a little swing back over that way that she absolutely loved to play on.
Last summer, Brandy Bielicki was about to take her daughter Cody on vacation near their home in Wisconsin.
And about 4 o'clock that day, she called me at work and we FaceTimed. She said, "Mom, can you FaceTime me?" "Sure, kid." She lost a tooth. She wanted to tell me she lost a tooth.
But when Brandy went home, the door was open and the only sign of Cody was a short note.
It was the first cry for help, and she went all the way.
Authorities found Cody's body in a nearby field. She was 10 years old.
It was the shock to the system. That was the last thing I was thinking. It was that she was going to take her own life because there was no signs.
None of it makes sense.
None of it made sense.
Death from suicide among children remains rare, but the number of children ages 6 to 12 who visited children's hospitals for suicidal thoughts or self-harm has more than doubled since 2016. Dr. Megan Schott heads psychiatric emergency services at Children's National Hospital.
If the child asks for help or tells you that they're struggling, believe them and help get them mental health treatment.
Signs parents can look for in young kids: grades dropping, anger and irritability, not wanting to go outside. And while Dr. Schott says it's good that talking about mental health has been normalized, she's concerned that younger kids are more exposed now to suicide and self-harm.
So if you see your friend cutting or talking about it, you might be starting to think about it.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
As a single mom, Brandy had been so close with Cody.
Do you think maybe she just did something super impulsive?
Absolutely. I think at 10 years old, they can't see past the tip of their nose and they don't understand permanence.
She's expecting a baby boy now and decorated his nursery with sloths, Cody's favorite animal. She's pleading for families to have conversations with their young kids.
Because if I can be caught off guard, and I was so involved with my daughter, it was just me and her. If I can be caught off guard, anybody can. You know, I thought I had beat all the odds as a single parent, and apparently there's one that I missed.
It is so heartbreaking. Alice and I talked to psychologists about how parents can talk to younger kids, and they said open-ended questions, finding a space to have those conversations. They also said talk using words that kids can understand. So if they know what worry means, you might ask, are you having thoughts that worry you? Are you having thoughts that scare you? And bottom line, Allison, always seek professional help. And you can tell your kids that there are people out there who can help you. Back to you.
If you or someone you know is struggling, help is available. You can speak to somebody anytime, day or night. All you have to do is call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That is 1-800-273-8255. Or you can text TALK to 741. 35% of people in New York have gotten at least one COVID shot, according to state data. But in upstate Hamilton County, that number is closer to 60%. They are outpacing every other county in New York. So how are they doing it? NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez is in Speculator Hamilton County to show us.
Allison, the factors that make this county high risk during the pandemic are actually part of the reason why they've been able to vaccinate so many people early on. So when you look at Hamilton County, this is the oldest county per capita in New York State. They also have the highest rate of people with disabilities and comorbidities, and they have a lot of frontline workers, volunteer firefighters and other volunteer law enforcement. So a large chunk of their population was eligible to get vaccinated early on. However, the county had to overcome some major obstacles to get the vaccines to these people. Take a listen.
And here we have no hospital, we have no pharmacy, we just have the public health department. So instead of sort of siloing the vaccine, they worked with us exclusively, got us the vaccine through the public health department, and then we were able to bring together community organizations, volunteer fire, volunteer ambulance, use our sheriff's office, use the schools as vaccination sites so that we could get the educators vaccinated as soon as they were eligible.
So as you just heard, Allison, this has really been a community effort, small town networking that has made this happen. The public health department asked the towns to put together lists of all of the residents, and then the calling and the door knocking began. I say door knocking because there's not a lot of cell service in the majority of this county. So I actually spoke with one of the volunteers in Piseco, New York, who's been making calls, knocking on her neighbors' doors, informing them that the vaccine is available here and helping them make their appointments. She told me that here everyone knows their neighbor and they really care about their neighbors. She's also a business owner. She told me that tourism is a really big deal here, and the pandemic has hit them really, really hard. So they're hoping that this summer they're able to go back to somewhat of a normal season. That has really been a driving factor, getting people out to get vaccinated. The next step for them right now is to try and get the Pfizer vaccine here. So right now, with their refrigeration capabilities, they only have the Moderna vaccine available. But, as you know, recently 16 and 17-year-olds became eligible to get vaccinated in New York State. They can only get that Pfizer vaccine. So they're building the infrastructure right now so that they can vaccinate those teenagers who are so essential to the tourism industry workforce here in this area. Allison.
The CDC declaring racism a serious public health threat. CDC Director Walensky saying the disparities seen over the past year were not a result of COVID-19. Instead, the pandemic illuminated inequities that have existed for generations and revealed for all of America a known but often unaddressed epidemic impacting public health, racism. NBCNews.com reporter Mary Flum joins me now. Mary, those are some pretty powerful words from Dr. Walensky. What else did she have to say on this?
Well, she was very frank. She said that confronting the impact of racism is not something that's going to be easy, but it's something that the time has come. And as she said, this is not just about COVID-19, and that while the numbers are very alarming about COVID-19 and the number of people that are getting sick and dying of COVID-19 being disproportionate in communities of color, it goes beyond COVID-19. She went on to talk in her remarks on the CDC website. This involves hypertension, diabetes, heart disease. The CDC has also published reports in 2019 talking about the disproportionate number of people, women of color, that are dying of pregnancy-related complications, 2 and 3 times as great a rate as white women. The number of babies of color, 4 times as great to die of complications related to a low birth rate. And so Dr. Walensky is really saying, and what she put forth yesterday is, racism is a serious public health threat, and it's one that she is committed now to addressing.
So let's talk about how they're going to do that, because Dr. Walensky says the CDC can really play a critical role in addressing these issues. So how do they plan to do that?
So, it's 4 steps she laid out on what she announced yesterday. For one thing, she wants to hold everybody accountable, right? So she wants to charge all offices under the CDC auspices to develop interventions and measurable health outcomes in the next year that specifically address racism. So she wants to hold folks accountable, and she wants to put a timeline on it in terms of getting things going. She's developed a portal that a lot of people are excited about, Racism and Health portal, in which it's going to be a hub of information, scientific and medical information, and also it's going to create a discourse. Again, she's about transparency and accountability here. They're going to continue to study the situation. And in addition to that, they're going to continue to invest resources in these communities where there are greater numbers of people of color, so that they're really going to be putting forth a number of efforts. And it should be noted that Congress is getting involved. So in February, Elizabeth Warren, she spearheaded a bill that's been reintroduced, specifically looking at these issues and looking to work with the CDC on addressing racism and public health.
A lot of work to do, and really important work to do. Mary, thanks for coming on with us today.
Thank you.
Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine shipments could drop 86% next week. White House COVID coordinator Jeff Zients confirming to NBC News that just 700,000 doses have been allocated for next week. 4.9 million were distributed this week. Joining me now, Dr. Richard Besser, former acting CDC director and the current president and CEO of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which was started by one of the founders of Johnson & Johnson. Dr. Besser, great to see you on this Friday. Zients also saying J&J is doing everything it can, but they are simply struggling with manufacturing problems. We know the U.S. is now averaging about 3 million vaccine doses a day. How could this potentially set that back?
Well, Allison, in order to answer that question, you have to know what the total vaccine supply per day is in the United States. And I don't know those figures. So how much of the Pfizer, how much of the Moderna vaccines are available? Will this decline from J&J lead to some states having to either cancel appointments or not make as many appointments? Hopefully not. Hopefully this is something that was known and that has been planned for. But without that, it would be very unfortunate if states have to pull back when vaccination has been ramping up so well across the country, and while we're still seeing such major disparities in terms of the number of people who are being vaccinated by race and ethnicity.
Yeah, we are really making some progress here. Let's hope that continues. Dr. Besser, today Pfizer asked the FDA for vaccine approval for 12 to 15-year-olds. Right now, it's only approved for people 16 and up. When do you expect we might get an answer from the FDA on this issue? And could those kids, if they get that approval, could those kids potentially get vaccinated before they go back to school in September?
Well, the hope is that children 12 and up will be able to be vaccinated before they go back to school in the fall. In terms of the process for FDA, they'll look at the data that's been submitted by the company, and they'll decide whether they want to reconvene that advisory committee that approved the emergency authorization to begin with. They're not required to, but they could decide that they want to go that route.
Okay.
The whole process could take a couple weeks before they decide whether the data are sufficient for them to make that extension. But it is very exciting. The idea, because we talk all the time about herd immunity. We're not going to get there until we have vaccines for children as well, because you could reach 80% of adults being vaccinated, but if kids aren't vaccinated, we still have to keep these same restrictions on that we currently have, because we want to keep our children safe.
Dr. Besser, NIH Director Francis Collins says his dream is to create a COVID pill, telling Stat News it is an extremely high priority for the Biden administration to speed up the process. I got to say, a COVID pill would be a dream for me, too, because I'd much prefer taking a pill with water than getting shots all the time. Could that potentially be in our future? Where are we on something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. The track record for making antiviral drugs has not been great. It's really, really slow. When you think about flu, we have Tamiflu. But, even there, that's a drug that has to be given very early in the course of influenza for it to have much benefit. What you'd like here, as Dr. Collins has said, is a drug that you could give to somebody who you're seeing in your office who has early signs of COVID or has been exposed to COVID that will prevent them from developing symptoms. Not something that has to be given IV, not something that's very expensive. Part of the reason you want this as well is that, while we're really encouraging people to get vaccinated, there's still a lot of people who are going to say, I don't want to be vaccinated. And you want to be able to provide something to those people who are infected who may not have gotten vaccinated at all.
Well, Dr. Besser, I have shot one Sunday afternoon, and I am really looking forward to it. Thank you for all of your encouragement and all of your advice throughout. We're really grateful for you.
Well, thanks. I just got my second dose, and from a mental health standpoint, I'm feeling great.
Congratulations. We are thrilled to hear that. Here's to your good health, Dr. Besser.
Thanks, and to yours.
Earlier this week, we told you about Cindy, a migrant teen who crossed the border and stayed in an overcrowded CBP facility in Texas. She was also in the hospital with COVID. Today, we have an update on that story. After nearly 10 years in separate countries, Cindy has reunited with her mother, Maria Anna, who was already here living in the U.S. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce was there for their emotional reunion.
Mariana can't sleep. She dreams of holding her 17-year-old daughter, Cindy, again.
No tengo palabras. Okay. Después de una tristeza, hoy estoy muy contenta que mi día ha sido largo.
That dream is about to become a reality. They're in the same country for the first time in nearly a decade. Cindy left the only home she knew in Honduras to cross the U.S.-Mexico border, all for this moment.
Las cosas a mí se me, como que si yo la había perdido para siempre. Es algo muy triste. Yo creo que no hay dolor tan duro que perder un hijo o que alguien no te diga dónde está tu hijo y que estés busque y busque y dónde está.
Mariana made the agonizing decision to leave their home country when Cindy was just a little girl. Like many immigrant parents, she came to the States to secure a better life for her children.
Ya nadie te va a hacer nada. Nadie nos va a separar.
Years apart, speaking whenever possible by phone or video chat. Then Cindy decided to join her. After Cindy was apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border, her mother thought she'd lost her to the U.S. immigration system for good. Cindy's first introduction to it, sleeping on the cold floor of an overcrowded detention facility in Texas.
Desde ahí se miró que nos miraban como unos bichos, como personas, como que no querían, ellos no querían que nosotros entráramos. Estando ahí, empezando por la comida. De ahí que nos bañamos cada 6 días, dormíamos en el suelo, aguantando frío. Ahí niñas de 4 añitos, o sea, todo el día, toda la noche llorando. Y de ahí empezaron a llorar las de 16, 17. Y, el momento que sacaban y nosotros, que me saquen a mí porque ya no quiero estar acá.
Next, another unfamiliar place, a Health and Human Services shelter at the San Diego Convention Center.
Mira.
And ultimately, a hospital where Cindy spent 3 days battling COVID. It's unclear how she contracted the virus. Mariana says she was kept in the dark the whole time. She didn't even learn of her daughter's hospitalization until Cindy borrowed a phone from a doctor.
Mi angustia fue que en el momento que ella me dijo ella que le habían dicho que tenía el coronavirus. Yo dije, mi niña es una víctima más del coronavirus. Yo mi hija la perdí, ya no la voy a volver a ver.
There are backlogs and delays in communication that are really unacceptable.
Kate Goldfinch is an immigration attorney who helped bring Cindy and Mariana together again.
80% of the unaccompanied minors in federal custody have a relative. They have someone they can be released to. And about 40% actually have a biological parent in the U.S. So we would think that it would be fairly quick and simple to release a child to their own parent. But because of the chaos of the system, the reunification of these kids with their parents is really frustrating and backlogged. Most frustrating, of course, for the actual children and their parents.
It's taken nearly a month for Cindy and Mariana to reconnect. The process of reunifying families is already arduous, further complicated by record numbers of unaccompanied migrant children crossing the southern border. Almost 19,000 in March, about 60% more than any other month in the last 3 years. Customs and Border Protection and the Office of Refugee Resettlement declined to answer specific questions about Cindy's case. A spokesperson for ORR said in part, quote, "Its first priority is to ensure that unaccompanied children are safe, healthy, and unified with family members or other suitable sponsors as quickly and safely as possible."
Que le tenemos miedo a hablar, perdemos a nuestros hijos. Y yo no me rendí. A mí me decían, espérate que no, yo no me espero. Porque me voy a esperar, es mi hija.
While the wait is over, the work is just beginning. Goldfinch says Cindy will likely seek asylum or special immigration status in court on the grounds that she did not feel safe in Honduras. Mariana, who is living in New York on a work permit, also has an immigration case pending and may consolidate hers with Cindy's. But right now, mom and daughter have a lot of catching up to do.
Yo sé que va a ser duro para ella, pero lo vamos a lograr juntas. Yo quiero un futuro mejor para mi niña.
Clearly, a mother's love knows no borders.
Border Patrol encounters with migrant families up 174% from February to March, according to Customs and Border Protection. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns shows us what happens once these families reach the United States.
It comes down to this. People fighting to get to this country and people fighting over who should get in. The Rio Grande Valley in Texas is the epicenter of the migrant surge, with more than 159,000 encounters here since October of 2020, much higher than anywhere else along the southern border. The biggest recent increase in Customs and Border Protection encounters has been among migrant families, up 174% from February to March, although notably still fewer than in March of 2019. So what happens to these families once they cross the border? We're at the wall right now. We just learned that about 600 people were just apprehended at the border, and we're going to go see what we can find out. Most families are brought here by smugglers and immediately surrender to Border Patrol. Beyond the wall in Mission, Texas, a temporary outdoor processing center has been set up under the Anzalduas International Bridge. No beds, no roof, no walls. But some migrant families told us they spent days here. You were under the bridge when Border Patrol detained you. What were the conditions like there?
Bien feo porque dormíamos en un gran frío y
very bad, very cold. They didn't give us nothing to cover ourselves with, and we would sleep on the dirt.
These two young mothers, both in their 20s, fled from Honduras with their children. The increase created a major capacity issue. Facilities overcrowded and the workforce stretched thin. So CBP has released many families here. And recently, Border Patrol agents were authorized to release them without a court date for an immigration hearing, a move, quote, intended to mitigate operational challenges. Some families even told us they weren't asked to provide any contact information to authorities. So it's unclear how the government will reach them to see that they go before immigration judges. This flies in the face of Biden administration policy.
If families come, if single adults come to the border, we are obligated to return them.
The White House says only unaccompanied minors are allowed to stay in the U.S. All others, families and individuals, should be expelled to Mexico under Title 42. That's an order enacted by the Trump administration to effectively close the border during the COVID-19 pandemic. But while the vast majority of individuals are indeed being expelled, many families are allowed to stay in the country. And that's because Mexico has stopped allowing the U.S. to expel families with kids under the age of 6 due to their own capacity issues. So once information like fingerprints and a photo are taken, many families are put on buses into border towns like McAllen. From there, city officials and volunteers from local NGOs take over.
And what happens from there after they're dropped off here?
Well, we immediately will make sure that they get tested for COVID. We have a site back there. That way we can then allow them to enter our center.
Sister Norma runs Catholic Charities, an organization that's been caring for migrants for years. With increasing numbers requiring more space, she's partnered with Our Lady of Guadalupe, a church run by Father Roy Snipes and his volunteers.
We have this beautiful hall and we got this beautiful school, and during the pandemic we're not using it at all. So we got we can open up the hall in the school, and there's never been a need for us to open up a refugee center. These numbers, this is a whole other reality. These are poor people struggling for their families to survive.
After a desperate and dangerous journey, this church is the first place in weeks where many can rest, have a good meal, and feel safe.
Over here in that classroom right there, number 10, that's where we give them their clothes to get a change of clothes. And, they just have just their basic mat, their blankets. And like I said, we give them dinner, a place to sleep, and some breakfast in the morning, and then they're on their way to wherever their destination is.
For most people, the destination is wherever they have a family member already living in the U.S.
Where are you going from here?
Denver, Colorado.
Indianapolis.
We met people heading to Florida, Maryland, Boston, California, all corners of the country. On my own trip back home to New York, the McAllen airport was filled with immigrant families, recognizable by the manila envelopes that contain their paperwork and a message to help navigate the journey. All the families we met told us they will try to get legal status to stay in the country more permanently. The majority on my flight seeking a new life in America.
There's no future over there, and I want a future for my son over here. She saw an opportunity, not for her, but for her son, and she saw an opportunity that she can come and give her son a better life.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.